Hey everybody, it's Monica with Fit Eats Coach, and today I'm back with super slow stand-up paddleboard yoga flow. If you have been doing yoga for a while, but you're new to stand-up paddleboarding and you're kind of wanting to try some yoga on the water, these are the best poses to get started with. Now I'll be sharing over a dozen beginner as well as intermediate yoga poses and tips, but if you know that you want to do certain poses, then you can just forward through the chapters in this video to get to what you want. All right, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is get used to the idea that when you're doing your practice, your board is going to be moving all around, even if you're anchored. So I anchored my board with a 5-pound weight plate. That's really all you need, and it pretty much stayed in place, except you'll see later in the video that it's kind of spinning around. So first thing you want to do is just come down to your hands and knees and maybe try a down dog, maybe try transitioning from down dog into plank, just to get a feel for the length and width of your board. Kind of play around with those two positions, and then when you feel comfortable with that, add in a chaturanga, maybe an up dog. You can even try a child's pose right there, just to get used to the idea of flowing back and forth. And you'll notice that as you're on the board doing these basic poses, your board is going to move with you. And it's kind of a nice feeling. I think initially when you start doing stand-up paddleboard yoga, it feels a little bit scary, like you're gonna fall off, but you quickly get used to that feeling, and it actually is very calming. Okay, so once you've done a couple of minutes of basic yoga poses to warm up, you have a feel for what it's like to be on the board, on the water, which is moving you around while you're doing your poses. You can then start to add in slightly harder poses. Low lunges are going to feel completely different on a stand-up paddleboard than they do on a mat. The minute that you take that foot right between your hands, your board is gonna start to rock from side to side. And it really forces you to slow down and engage your core and think about your spinal alignment. These are all really great things, and especially if you're adding in a twist or maybe some overhead arm movement, you really have to focus on what's happening with your core. And this is awesome because once you take this practice back to your mat, you're gonna feel so much more stable, and you may be able to move faster on your mat, which is something that a lot of people tell me that they struggle with when they're doing like a warrior flow or sun salutation, moon salutation. They can't keep up with an instructor that they've watched online or on YouTube, because they just can't move that quickly. The water is going to slow you way down, but then when you take it back onto your mat, you're going to feel like you can just go through a flow a lot more smoothly and transition a lot more quickly between poses. Now, one really helpful tip that I have for you is that you can actually take your leash off and use it to secure your paddle off of the board if you are anchored. I obviously wasn't doing that in this video because the last 4 times that I've practiced stand-up paddleboard yoga, I was floating down the length of a lake and the water was pretty choppy. And if I fell off of the board, I didn't want to have to swim after it if it got away from me. So I kept my leash on, I kept my paddle on the board. That limits the space that you have to move around. You have to maneuver around all these things, which makes your practice a lot more challenging. So if you're anchored, the really nice thing is that you can take your leash off and tie it to your paddle, throw it off. You can even have bags that rest around your board for gear that you may have, so that you free up more space on your board and you can have a practice that is a lot easier because you just will have a lot more space. All right, once you're done with some plank deep lunge variations, you can move on to some deep hip openers. If you have your paddle on the board, like I said, this is going to be a lot more challenging because the paddle is going to be in your way, but you can still maneuver your way around it. One of the amazing things about being in pigeon on the water is that your hand is right by the water and you can just play around with the water, which helps to calm you down. If you struggle to be in this pose because you have really tight hips, it will kind of, tune you into other things that are happening around you that might ease you into this pose a little bit better. If you're adding some thread the needle or some quad stretching into this, be sure to really take your time as you're going into these variations and kind of look around to see what's around you. We'll talk more about your surroundings in a minute. Are you finding this content helpful? If you are, please subscribe, hit the like button and the notification bell, and even leave us a comment. We really appreciate your support of our channel. Okay, now I'm sure you've noticed that there's more people arriving at the lake, especially little children. I was actually surrounded by kids that were playing in the water, screaming, having a great time. At one point, I was a little bit worried that a group of kids were gonna knock my camera down just by accident. And it really started to distract me from my practice, and I wish I had paddled to the other side of the lake and filmed over there to begin with. So when you're looking for a place to set up, make sure that you look at your surroundings and kind of notice what's going on or what may be going on within the amount of time that you've allotted for your practice, so that you don't feel too distracted. Obviously there's always going to be distractions, but you want to keep that to a minimum so that you can have a really enjoyable practice. All right, now that you've done about 7 minutes of basic poses, including hip openers, lunge variations, planks, down dogs, up dogs, all that stuff, we're gonna finish up with 4 minutes of seated and laying poses. And at this point, you can be done with your practice, or you can then continue with intermediate stuff. So first we're gonna get into garland pose, and then from there we're gonna come down to sitting. This is where my board really started spinning around, and one thing you'll notice that when you're doing seated twists is your board will spin even more, even if the water is not going very fast or there's not a whole lot of wind. It's actually kind of fun, and it's also really fun to, at this point, put your legs in the water. This whole time you've maybe touched the water with your hands, maybe you've thought you were gonna fall in, and now you can actually, really get in there. We're actually gonna use the water in some of the intermediate poses to help us stretch. We're gonna use the resistance of the water. All right, but first let's start with, a basic tabletop. One thing with tabletops is you have to get your feet in the right spot. Otherwise, you really have a hard time getting your hips up in the air, which is what was happening here with me. So next time I do tabletop, I'm gonna think about my form a little bit more. You can do all kinds of seated twists, either with your legs on the board or elevated a little bit higher. And you can just kind of go back and forth between these different poses as much as you like. Hold them for as long as you feel like holding them. Being in that tabletop is definitely a very interesting feeling. I love tabletops. I do them all the time in my regular practice and even in some of my workouts, but on the board it is just like you're looking straight at the sky. And it's an incredible feeling. And that's one thing that I wanted to mention about your practice at this point is there's all these things happening around you aside from people being around you. You know, the wind is going, there's like tree leaves that are rustling, the water is making certain sounds. There are certain smells coming maybe from people's campgrounds or even from, you know, the trees. These are all things to tune into to make your practice more special. And especially if you're going to lay back in corpse pose at the end. Corpse pose is one of those poses that a lot of people don't like because their mind starts going crazy and they can't calm it down. They start thinking about what they're going to do the rest of the day. On the board, I can tell you from experience, that's not going to happen. And even if it happens to you a lot on your mat, on the board, it's a very different feeling. So if you've always wanted to have a better corpse pose at the end of your class to really kind of absorb everything you've done in your practice, doing it on a stand-up paddle board is going to transform your corpse pose into something amazing. So just tune into your surroundings, look at the sky, listen, you know, smell, feel the water. It's a really amazing feeling to be out in nature versus being on a mat inside a studio or in your home. All right, so that was 11 minutes of beginner yoga poses. And if you're feeling pretty confident at this point and you're more in the intermediate level, you can definitely add some intermediate poses right away. One of my favorites is kneeling dancer. And this pose is like a combination between a bird dog and also a back bend. It's intense stretch for the quads. It's also incredibly challenging for the core and back. Again, your board is going to rock a lot from side to side, so you really need to focus on what's going on with your deep abdominals and engage the entire posterior chain, including your glutes, so that you stay really stable on the board. The first time that I tried this pose, my board was rocking so hard that I thought I was gonna fall off, which was really funny. I couldn't hold the pose for more than a few seconds. I actually couldn't even get into the pose the first time, but it's starting to feel pretty stable. Now, all of these beginner poses and intermediate poses are really great ways to build that confidence and strength and balance that you need to do more advanced poses. For example, this camel variation is really great for eventually being able to do wild thing or side plank or, you know, side plank into an arm balance. So practice poses that are going to help you with the yoga goals that you have set for yourself. Now from here, you can take it up to standing. And I found that the best way to come up to standing is to squat and then to come up. Some people try and do it from down dog. I have found that to be not that helpful. So you kind of have to figure out your own ways to transition between standing, kneeling, sitting, laying, and even going on the side of the board, which we're about to do in a bit. Now, once you start to feel really stable and confident standing on your board, you can actually work to destabilize it. You can rock it as hard as you like. And this is going to help you to build that stability that you need for single leg poses, like any tree poses, big toe pose, maybe even a bird of paradise if that's something that you're aiming to do on your board. Now from here we're going into a forward fold, which is pretty similar to a down dog. But it does have this feeling of like you're gonna dive into the water. So if you struggle with that, you can always place your hands on your shins or on your thighs, and then from there come down into a squat, back into your plank, and then transition into a side sitting position for our final pose, which is seated gate pose, using the resistance of the water to help you side bend. Seated gate pose is one of the best poses to lengthen your hip flexors, your obliques, your lats, to open up the chest and shoulders, to release tension in the neck, and also lengthen the inner thighs and hamstrings. At the gym, I generally teach this pose to clients sitting on a workout bench. And of course, if you're doing it at home on a yoga mat, you would have to fold your back leg behind you, which can be a little bit challenging for some people. So having the water there is really helpful. You can just hang your leg in the water, and you can even push into the water with that leg to help you into that side bend. And if you find that you can't bend as deeply the first time around, then you can do 2 rounds of this, and you'll find that the second time around feels a lot easier. You can even add some arm binds behind your back, and then after this, you're done. After you finish your last pose, you can just get your anchor out of the water, and the water will just float you back to shore, and you can be done with your practice. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this video and it has been helpful. I will be back soon with more fun summer workouts and other workouts to help you get your fittest, leanest body. Thanks for watching.